Hi, Gary. Welcome to the Positive Power of Pain podcast.
Hi, Victoria.
We are going to be talking about your anatomy in motion, FlowMotion model today, and how it impacts different aspects of health in our body. Can I ask you just to introduce yourself a little bit first?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Gary Ward, and I created Anatomy in Motion in around 2007, and have been working to understand the human body's movement through the gait cycle since approximately that time, a little bit before. I'm a personal trainer by background, qualified in 2001, so 21 years ago, and moved into education where once people started asking me to tell me what the hell I'm doing, because what I was doing was working quite nicely, and at the time I wasn't 100% sure what I was doing. So the long and the short of it is Anatomy in Motion was founded as an idea almost where we can use movement to correct people's movement patterns that would serve to benefit them in a sense of well-being in the long run. So as a personal trainer, people would come to me because they had back pain or shoulder pain or knee pain, not necessarily to run a marathon or lose weight or put on extra muscle. So I was instantly looped into this corrective exercise scenario, which just meant for me, lots of looking into what I can do to help people more. But alongside that was this fascination of how the body moves, and recognition that there is this thing called a gait cycle. And you can listen on loads of other podcasts. My kind of insight from the ski boot fitting angle. I was previously a ski boot fitter, but what that meant was that I was taught. I say taught. It was 3 days. I had 3 days training in the foot and the anatomy of the foot and what pronation is and what supination is. And I was fascinated. So finding a neutral foot, helping people access a neutral foot, kind of meant that people's comfort improved in their skiing and their performance improved in their skiing. And so I was instantly working with this idea that alignment equals better, whether it's pain or performance. And then it was about understanding why can't we stay aligned? Why do we distort away from alignment? What is alignment? And then this whole journey opens up. But the interesting thing that was documentable for me was a description of how the foot moves through the gait cycle, and that it should be able to access both ends of its movement spectrum, so a pronation and a supination. And for those listening who are unsure of what that language is, a pronation is where the foot flattens, the arch lowers towards the ground, and a supination is when it rises up, comes away from the ground, becoming more rigid. And so we have this idea of moving from a flat, softer, more malleable type foot shape to a hard, rigid structure where the arch was down and the arch is up. And in that sentence, what you're hearing is a list of opposites. So the two states of one structure can oppose each other, and it's incredibly healthy to experience that in a footstep. And so if the foot is flat, I wanted to know what the influence of that is on the knee, and if the foot is high arched and rigid, what's the influence of that on a knee? And it turns out you need to be able to do both of those things in a single footstep. And so then the connection up to the hip, the pelvis, the spine. And for me, it turned out that in order to have a healthy body, and when I say healthy, I'm back into the realms of pain and performance, we need to enable our structures to be able to access both sides of their possible movement scenarios. So like I said, pronation, supination in the back, you need to be able to flex and extend your spine, or side bend left and right. And that creates a balance. And the big difference about anatomy in motion versus the concepts that were being taught when I was, early 2000s, was a lot more about stability, not mobility. Being stable, not having movement. And a stable spine was a neutral spine. But for me, I was seeing people train hard at finding neutral. but having a distorted sense of posture. Whereas what I was finding is that people were able to move and develop a straighter spine by experiencing the two ends of the extreme possibilities of movement.
Yeah.
And I think that opened my eyes hugely to a lot of the concepts that you probably want to talk about today.
So the contrast, it's all about contrast of experiencing different movements and sensations in the body.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, anatomically, it makes complete sense, because a muscle is designed to both have length and shortening. And when it's long, the bone or the joint is in one position, and when it's the same muscle is short, the bone or the joint has to be in the opposite position. And so can we create an environment where we're able to enable all of our joints in all of our body to experience both ends of its movement potential for all of our muscles to both lengthen and shorten, and then find a resting point in between? So no muscles are left long, which is actually tension, and tension equals stress, and no muscles are left short, which is actually where joints are being compressed, and compression equals discomfort as well. And so are we stuck in these positions of being some muscles long, some muscles short, some joints closed, some joints open, and then unable to get out of those positions and just living in them, exercising in them, taking medicine to overcome them, injecting them, foam rolling them, doing stretches? But actually what we need to then talk about is that these are habits that the human itself, its innate intelligence, has enabled us to access for a higher goal, if you like.
Absolutely.
And we kind of get stuck in those spaces.
I just want to speak a little bit about what brought me to you initially, because it was all about the foot. I just completed a clinical massage degree where I'd spent 3 or 4 years learning like in-depthly about different ranges of movement of the body, how muscles and connective tissue and everything kind of worked, and learning everything there was and every technique there was to release pain from injury. However, what we didn't really learn about, we learned about how to mobilize joints, but we didn't actually learn so much about, we learned nothing about the movement of gait. And I remember I went to a myofascial release convention, and someone there told me that they'd been on your course and that you'd written a book called What the Foot. And the moment I heard that title of your book, it was like something in me just happened. And I was actually due to go on and become a clinical massage teacher, so on the very course that I'd done my degree on. But when I heard about your book, something just happened. And you get those moments in life where you just feel pulled towards something. And the reason for that was that even though I'd done my long clinical massage degree and I was trained as a systematic kinesiologist, I knew that years ago, back in 1997, when I'd learned reflexology as one of the first holistic practitioner therapies that I ever did, no matter what else I had gone and learned and done, I was still fascinated that I could come back to reflexology and get a therapeutic result, a measurable result on a health condition, not just on pain relief, but on a health condition. So I knew, having done the whole journey of learning incredibly in-depth stuff, and thousands of clinic hours by that point, that the foot was a gateway to the body. And when I heard about your course, I just, for me, that was like, oh my God, I just knew, there was no reasoning other than it was a feeling that I just knew I had to come and train with you. And then I came, and you split, the first course I did with you split into 2 lots of 3 days. And I think it was in the first lot of 3 days that we were there. There were about 40 of us in the room. You had a few people supporting you, and Chris was one of them. And Chris was getting us to do something where we were moving our hip joints and our adductors and abductors in our thighs. And I literally went into a kind of freeze state. And I remember feeling very unsafe and very, very numb. He was saying, do this, and I literally couldn't even access it. And and it was extraordinary because I felt like most people in that room were personal trainers or maybe osteopaths, or I felt quite unusual in terms of clinical massage. I mean, no, we had Pilates teachers, Bowen,
many forms, many therapists. Yeah.
Many therapists. But at that moment, I felt like more like a client suddenly experiencing something that was being triggered. And Chris said to me, do you need to leave the room? He could clearly see. And I was like, yes. And you and I went out of the room. And I'll never forget that moment, because you basically got me to begin to breathe into what is a cog, which is something that we teach, and to start to change not just movement but timing of movement of different parts of my body with each other. But what, for me, I wasn't there as a personal trainer. I was there as a practitioner who works with a lot of clients who are in chronic pain or have histories of chronic trauma and memories locked into their bodies. Yeah. And for me, that's my history. That's been my my journey. And your model, what it's done, and as I described to you, it's almost given the keys to unlock the joints. So I see the joints as like the locks. A lot of trauma work, a lot of work about chronic pain is about releasing muscles, stretching muscles, contracting muscles. But what I learned through your model was that actually it's learning to remind the body of the joint movements, in different directions. And as you say, joints act, muscles react. Right. And out of every model and everything I'd learned, it was actually your model that gave me the keys to access parts of my body that until then were basically numb, and I didn't have access to them. And here we are, I think that was 2013, 2014. Yeah. And as I've said to you since, if I'd known what was going to happen when I learned to unlock those parts of my body that had managed to hold in a lot of memories and unconscious stuff, would I have continued? I'm not sure. Here I am. I've had a divorce. I've had, because actually, what I've learned, and I had to learn for myself to then be able to bring to my clients and people that I teach, is that our body is a master of holding stuff unconsciously. And that's where you come from a personal trainer background. I come ultimately from, you've got chronic illness, you've got chronic pain. Let's start to get your body feeling safe enough and realign it. And as we realign the body, and I use what I've learned with you to do that, and then I suppose I use other techniques that I've learned from other aspects of my training over 25 years to then help move that pain or that trauma out of the body. But it's your model of getting into the bones, getting into the alignment, that gives the strength and the connectedness to move that pain safely. I think that's how I would describe it. And I remember saying to Chris, there's something going on here that you're not teaching in the room. And he was like, well, yeah, but we can't get all that out in when we're teaching. But can you kind of say what your take is on that aspect of what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I don't know if we'll ever answer the question about what's not being talked about in the room, not because we don't want to, but it's because we probably can't.
And it's time as well, yeah.
Yeah, but this, what about just the simple idea that if we think about the brain, if we think about the nervous system, I don't think we understand it. I certainly don't. And even those who endeavor to work in such environments, they claim something like we only understand or use a really small percentage of what our brain is capable of doing. And so if I chunk all the way up to the top of, let's consider your scenario, I think of two words come to mind, and one is protection and the other is survival. And as humans, there is nothing holding our skeleton in place except ourselves. Our bones have definitely got limitations to their movement. There are definitely boundaries to what they're able to do, and that comes down to the joint surface anatomy. That, in English, is the shape of the end of the bone meeting the shape of another end of the bone, and that shape creates an actual possibility of movement, and for many of them in 3 dimensions. So the whole thing isn't going to fall out, but it can hold itself in awkward positions. And so we'll talk about response to injury, response to daily life, daily habits. We can talk about response to trauma. And all of these adaptations are kind of in the name of protection and survival, which is kind of ironic, because then we're going to say that the posture that you have adopted to protect yourself is now the posture that is actually causing you problems.
Yeah.
So we've gone from a short-term solution to an injury, creating a long-term problem. So one of the analogies I'll always use to keep it simple is you sprain your ankle. But for most people, it makes sense, not necessarily consciously, you do this unconsciously and you do it immediately, is you put your weight on the other leg, take the pressure off the leg that is injured. And it doesn't take long. It's a period of, actually I can't remember now if it's 2 minutes or 2 hours, but 2 hours of holding your foot in a non-usual position is enough. The analogy was taping your fingers. If you tape your fingers for a couple of hours, your brain will start to eliminate the idea that you've got 2 fingers. It will start to think of it as one. So think about spending time in a cast for 6 weeks, rolling your ankle, fibular bone finds a different position, foot can't go back to where it was, we rest it, we do some circles with it in the air to write our name, and kind of hope that the skeletal structure goes back to normal. In fact, we don't even get that far. We just hope it feels okay and we can play football on Saturday without even any of those thoughts. But what our body has done is gone, well, Jesus, I can't put my weight on that thing. But I do need to play football on Saturday. So what we'll do is we'll put 70% of weight through our left leg. Now the whole body has had to change position. And we look at that as your center. You moved your center of mass from right to left. If you move your center of mass left, your pelvic position changes. So it might hike up on one side, it might rotate away from the problem leg, it might tilt in order to accommodate movement on the left leg. Now your spine is in a different shape. Your spine will have bent in the bottom towards the left, it will have rotated back towards the problem, it will have extended as a result of the tilt. And now your shoulder girdle's in a different place, your neck's in a different place, your eyes are having to take different input in. But it's soon, the fascinating thing about the human body is how quickly it normalizes this for you.
Sure.
And now you are in a normalized, alternate state of structure that is now going to dictate the rest of your days until you are able to revert it back to where it was pre-ankle sprain. And that is not going to be achieved by doing rolling circles in the air to write your name. It's not going to be achieved by putting it in an ice bucket. It's not going to be achieved by strapping it because of the 2-hour rule. It's going to be achieved by somebody paying enough attention to say, that bone is not in the right place. That movement is unable to happen because of this position of this bone, understanding the mechanism of the injury, and then creating an environment through movement or even manual intervention to allow that foot to work like it did before the injury. Once you do that, the brain, it no longer will make sense to be on the left leg, will start to come back to the right leg. And just in that note, if just talking about structural pain before we get to your space, that left leg, if it's been carrying you for 10 years, maybe the one where all the problems are. And then the problem with where the problems are is people want to treat it, and you want it treated.
Yeah.
But is that the actual problem that is being tackled? And so back to those two words, protection and survival. One, we're protecting the injury by moving away. And survival, I think, is the innate goal of this, us as beings, I suppose. Like we can then start to put a label of everything that you've done is about survival. And that happens in your structural body as well as in your mind.
Yeah.
So in the classroom, when I think, because what you're talking about is a general guided session, we would do these things called check-ins, which was, so Gary's talked about how when you move your pelvis, the spine should respond, and when you move your spine, how the shoulder girdle should respond, and etc. And so, you know, you've just heard that the pelvis can do 8 things. It'll tilt in both directions, hike on the left, hike on the right, shift to the left, shift to the right, rotate left, rotate right. Let's just find out which of those you are physically capable of doing.
Exactly.
Yeah,
or remembering. Remembering, like, because there's that difference, isn't there? There's what you've just forgotten you can do.
Yeah.
And then there's what you can't do because you really can't do it, kind of thing.
Yeah. And the idea that if you can't do it here, quietly concentrating on it, you aren't doing it out there.
Yeah.
Because out there is where life happens. And so walking down the road, you aren't doing it. Going for a run, you aren't doing it. Playing football at the weekend, you aren't doing it. Sitting, delivering a podcast, you aren't doing it. It's not happening. And we call that what's missing. And so one of our jobs is to pay attention to what it is that the human in front of me who is suffering from pain can't do in their movement. Yeah. Because then we're able to create a map, a chart, if you like, of how a person stands. I use Stickman. Like, my biggest, highest, and most expensive assessment tool is a Stickman.
Yeah.
And people will say, "Can you teach me to draw a Stickman?" Oh my God, it can't be that hard. Yeah. But it's the most information-giving aspect of an assessment. When you can draw a Stickman that represents the person in front of you, they are able to look at it and go, "Oh, wow, no wonder I have discomfort there." You can point and say, "Look, can you see how all of that area is long? Yeah. Can you see how all of that is short?" Yeah. And these problems, I was able to pinpoint a person last week to say, his Stickman was able to show, and the assessment was able to show, that his piriformis syndrome, or sciatica down the leg, was basically a hip that was internally rotated, extended and abducted, and he couldn't get out of it. And when we asked him if he can do these movements that would give him the solution, he couldn't. So that's what we do. We simply teach him to put the movements back. But if you just go straight to the sciatica, to the piriformis syndrome, you can inject the piriformis, you can foam roll it, you can stretch it, you can even look at foot pronation, etc. But if it's not going to be, like, foot pronation is great, but if it's not useful, if it's not actually feeding the appropriate movement into the whole body, that's why we become a whole body fascination rather than anything else. So what I wanted to get to is all of those adaptations, I think, come down to us either moving into a place that protects us from the problem, or let's say you had an accident and you actually got forced into a shape. When either way, you ended up in a non-aligned space, and your movements created habits and behaviors that left you stuck in that space.
And can I just butt in here, Gary, because we're talking about, or you're talking about, when we've had an accident or an obvious injury, but I suppose a lot of what I'm working with, or what was my experience as well, is the alignment can go out because of a chronic state of grief or fear or an emotion, where literally when you're feeling that emotion or you're in a state of fear, your alignment can collapse. And I feel that, I mean, as a clinical massage therapist, obviously people are coming because of injuries quite often, but very often they have undiagnosed pain with, when I say that, I mean they may have gone through the medical world, they've had all kinds of tests, and no one can really find what the problem is. And then what very often it is people's body, because their nervous system kind of does, you're so numbed out, and I believe this was kind of my experience, that your posture has just collapsed. And in terms of the nervous system, I mean, I have, after years of using your process, I've been fascinated about the numbing out in the body and the collapse that causes the lack of alignment. And the closest thing I found that's helped me make sense of it, and that I use with my clients, is the polyvagal theory, because it's almost like when we are in deep trauma or under life threat, cortisol can make us go numb in our pelvic area. The fight or flight response can completely send us out of alignment in our rib cage area, you know. So these nervous system reactions, which are very healthy reactions to difficult situations, and obviously we need to be mobilized, we need fight or flight. But I think my journey with myself, when I learned about the polyvagal theory, and that, you know, we have the dorsal vagal nerve in our belly, which is actually designed when you're in danger to kind of make you numb so you can survive. Because if you were feeling such high levels of terror or whatever it is, you couldn't actually get on with your life. And for me, that's where I've brought other elements of my learning to try and understand, because, you know, I created my own course based on your FlowMotion model and a few other bits called Get Into Your Body. And what I noticed, called Get Into Your Body, because I needed to call it something. And what I noticed was, as I teach it, you know, and it's a 7-week course, the level 1, and it starts with the feet, getting people to move and understand the different movements and the different ranges of movements. And basically I teach them all these movements, and they start to see what's missing, or what they can't feel, or what doesn't make sense. And as you know, I remember you saying in the first 3-day course, you know, there's this day of chaos, because as the brain starts to explore different sensations, it feels chaotic, and also the nervous system's going like, what on earth's going on? You know, this is like, nothing makes sense in the body. But in my work, I have made some sense of, you know, if there isn't a specific injury, it's that makes sense of something, that very often there are emotional and life experiences that can have the same impact on collapsing the alignment. So yeah, I'm interested to see what you have to say about that.
I just said, undoubtedly, like, it is nice from my perspective if you do have a very real, tangible event. Because to me it makes sense. I listen to how an injury occurred, I think about what impact that would have had on the body, I'll check the body in reality to see if that's actually where it's still stuck, and then you know, got an easy pathway out. I guess that if there's trauma or emotional issues, looking for a better word there, but then it is very similar to you to need to try and understand the trigger of those things in order to be able to work with them. Because I think in any scenario you will respond in one of 2 ways, and that's a yin way or a yang way. And normally they are opposites. And I think this may be a little oversimplifying, but it does seem that everything has its 2 extremes, happy and sad, right? And we get stuck in sadness, or we get stuck in happiness. And actually, as most people know, if they're perpetually happy, they're not really happy. So neither is a good thing. You need a good, healthy balance of both, and be able to manage both sides of this coin. Because you mentioned fight and flight, and as stuff got unhappy in your system, in the classroom, you go into fight or flight. and you chose one. And then if that happens in your body, one of your ways to protect yourself is to flee. And you suddenly you maintain yourself in that state, then you can't get out of it. And you're there for long enough, you don't know how to get out of it. You then need guidance and help in order to do that.
And you don't even know you're in it. I mean,
no,
this
you
is
don't
all
even very unconscious.
Yeah, you're not even aware of it. So how do you even know you need to get out of something when you don't even know you're in it?
And the vast majority of the Western world will be in fight or flight, and that's the big conversation. Is you're not running from the saber-toothed tiger anymore. You're actually creating stress through your everyday activities. My friend Mike Weeks, who wrote a book called Resilience by Design, which is recently out, anybody who finds himself in this scenario is well worth looking at that. He says we do stress. We don't have stress, and we are not stressed. We choose to do it. And it's empowering yourself to recognize that it's no longer something you want to do, or you're going to do it when it's useful, because it's always useful. Everything is actually necessary. Stress is necessary, like you said. Being able to run when the bear walks down the street is a really good idea. But just stop running and recover and find a place where there's no bear and be happy and be content again. And so doing stress, recognizing that you have the power and the choice to know that I'm doing it, or I'm doing it and it's not serving me. What's the opposite scenario? And so when it comes to, I guess, working with traumas and emotions, if they don't know it's happening to them, it's going to take somebody to point that finger, to help them see it, to help them recognize it, and to help them unravel it in a way. Like, what are the opposites, and what states can we begin to access to make that happen? And it seems like, and I know, if I'm blatantly honest, when I chose to move more into the anatomical structure. One because I had a very strong reason to try and promote this model and work with it. But I also found it a lot easier to work with structural musculoskeletal injuries. So kudos for you for taking on that other side. And I've heard so many of your stories. They're just wonderful. But I feel like in that conversation, what we're doing is we're splitting or separating mind from body, and we shouldn't do that. Mind, body, it's almost one word. Where what we know is you can influence the mind. If you get on top of these mental scenarios that are dominating you, you will have more freedom in your body. And if your body is the thing that is causing your mental stress because of pain or chronic issues, then getting on top of your body is going to instantly alleviate those stresses and strains as well. So there's a two-way roads in here.
Because can I say something? So my experience of this, of almost taking on both sides, is that a lot of pre-verbal experiences. So we've been living in our body since before we took our first breath. And there's, in my experience of working with people with the Get Into Your Body system, which I've taken from your system, is that the body is holding like pre-verbal experiences. There are things that we can't, as an adult, remember experiencing as a child, or experiences we had, which we were having when our alignment actually was forming, the foundation. And I've worked for years with trying to facilitating people to release undiagnosed pain. But actually, without a strong foundation, it's quite an unsafe thing to do, to kind of start trying to change or shift what people are holding. And actually, it was your model, the anatomical model, and coming into the bones, that actually gives, bizarrely enough, the feeling of safety, the sensation of safety in the body. And I'll just share. I said this to you. I was going through a very traumatic court process in the last 3 or 4 years, which finished about a year ago. And the one thing out of all resilience tools that I'd learnt, the one thing when I was in kind of what was like the line of fire in the courtroom was coming into the sensation of my joints and my bones. Nothing could make me distrust that sensation. I could feel it, and having learnt to move in different ranges of movement, I knew how to bring myself in. And that brain, that animal brain that we have, you know, it loves the feeling of connection. And you know, that, I think that's what inspired me to make the course as well. You know, I've put hours and hours of time into then creating this model of how to move safely and feel into our bones, because that, for me, in my experience, and that now of so many clients, you know, and people who've done the course, has been the foundation for everything else to realign itself. So it's kind of,
is it possible that is because is a strong word there, but that is a very tangible feeling that you can have. You can touch it, experience it, explore it. The mental side of things, very difficult to do that.
Confusion, like what's real, what's not.
I mean, you ultimately, to make it tangible, you almost have to write them down, you know, feel them on paper somehow. You have some way to make them come to life so that you can stare at them almost as if you're looking at them as somebody else's, which is actually a good technique to be able to then guide yourself as to, if that was your friend, what would you tell them to do? And so there are processes that make it tangible, but until you bring it into reality, it becomes it's very abstract and almost impossible to deal with. And in NLP terms, we have these state generalization, distortion, and deletion. So all of the stuff that's going on up there in your head, generalized from experiences where one thing went wrong at some point, and you made that into lots of things causing the same problem. So the distortion is, you know, taking the idea of falling off a chair. It's got 4 legs, and you're afraid of chairs, but actually you're afraid of anything with 4 legs. You've distorted. And you'll catastrophize about, oh my God, it's got 4 legs. Going on up here, and you feel like you don't have any control over it. And deletion, of course, is the final one, which is where we have memories that we don't ever want to touch again, or reach into, or open the door of, and we'll shut them away. And interestingly, on that last one, and I think this may have been what was going on in the room for you, is you can use movement to push all those things out and back to the surface. And again, I have no idea how and why that happens, but it happens so many times. And people say, you know, emotions are locked in the psoas, but I think more that what you said about the joints, just the system itself has organized itself, distorted itself in order to, by deleting movements, in order to manage what is going on in the head. And
I know I spent years trying to release muscles to get in touch with my feelings or event. It never worked. And then the joints, when you get into the joints, and it's a different sensation, and you know when you're in there, because when the joints engage, your brain, I mean, this is what I see with my clients and participants. It's like these light bulb moments of, oh my God, wow, I can feel that now. And it always generally feels like support, stamina, powerful, safe, you know, and you're just in. I describe it as coming in. And of course, it has to start with the correct connection to the foot tripod. We haven't spoken about the tripod, but it all starts there, because actually engaging anything further up without being connected to your foot tripod is also a bit meaningless. That's
there's lots of things around that. So the thing is, we choose to work with muscles, releasing muscles, stretching muscles, activating muscles. If the joint that those muscles connect to is unable to perform its full potential, the work with the muscle is either a very, very long process or a waste of time.
Yeah, exactly.
Getting a joint to perform, to execute its movement in the way it's designed, creates no option but for a muscle to respond, and that's the joints act, muscles react scenario. And so this, and then another addendum to that is, if you get that joint to fulfill its potential, you instantly ask the next one in line to do the same. And that's how we end up with these long chains of movement from that foot tripod up all the way up to the neck. And there is a connection that we can make from the foot to the spine, the foot to the neck, because it just becomes patterns. And there's a real simplicity to it that I can never overestimate to people. But it seems difficult, it seems impossible, but there's a very simple step-by-step ABC journey through the skeletal structure, which makes that, if you can then use that simple structure to unlock people's position, give them access to new positions, which is going to then create mind-body response.
And can I just say there that, so for me, as those joints engaged, and as you say, the relationship that as one engages, that it has with the next one moving up the body, it's like, wow, I could start to feel, I didn't have to try, it just was. And there's a big difference between trying to feel something and something just switching on. Yeah. And I think in what I teach with people who aren't practitioners, I'm teaching people who are coming because of some challenge or curiosity about their body. It's that sensation of something switching on with no trying, where it's like, oh my goodness, and it feels right. And then the brain's immediately kind of like, whoa. And it sounds so simple, and yet, it needs to work from the feet up, that the joints align correctly. And of course people meet the places where, no, I can't feel that, I don't know what you mean. And it's like, okay, well, that's great information. The fact that you now know there's something you can't feel, or an area, is a great starting point to see what we can do around that. And for someone like myself who had a history of trauma, those engagements of those joints, and that was the sensation that brought me into my body. It wasn't going back to a memory or trying to remember some traumatic event, to get back in my body. It was the feeling, the engagement of those joints. And it was like, whoa, hello, and that was a really powerful experience, which I now share with people.
I think you're tapping into, I think the real side of the work is the unconscious side, because you're using the word try, and there are all kinds of quotes, aren't there, about trying. Yoda's there's only do. So there's no point trying something if you do something, the right thing, you will get a response. And the body, if we can trust that the body is intelligent enough to take the information and do with it what it needs, then I guess the flip side is that if you're stretching your hamstrings every day and you were told to do that, but it's not improving your back pain, stop stretching your hamstrings. It's not it. Because what we know is that when you tap into the right movement, you do get really strong, positive outcomes. I'm not saying solutions, I'm not saying back pain gone. Sometimes you get these kind of miracle outcomes, amazing. But for a lot of people, there's a lot of work. But the work involves then understanding what's required, how to move a joint. And this starts to then get like, oh my God, I need to become an anatomist to look after myself. Actually, no. They're just very simple movements that we can instruct and guide, and you can do for yourself. And I can see you've got something to say.
I'm like,
for me, the most, what gets me out of bed is more the idea that we can help people take ownership of themselves.
Sure.
So I teach practitioners, but I'm teaching practitioners and the understanding that the person who is capable of doing the healing is not them. They are not responsible for your well-being. You are.